and make sure to share my screen. Unlike one session last year, where you got to just look at up my nose the whole session. All right, here we go. Okay, before we get started, I'm going to introduce Colin Chong. He's Chong. Okay, good, I got it right. Colin Chong from App Carousel. And if you guys haven't heard of them before, they have, you guys kind of have a whitelist system for building applications for other people, right?
Actually, not quite, but.
Okay, well, I'm butchering it. We're going to let him introduce App Carousel, but they're a local company. They've been around for a little while, and he's going to tell you a bit more about them.
So thanks for having me here. My name is Colin Chong. I'm head of product management for App Carousel. I started there as a business analyst 5 years ago coming out of university. And since then, I've been given the opportunity to become a product manager. When we acquired our one of our first few companies that we acquired, and I worked on a mobile product for BlackBerry. And in more recent years, I've gone and reorganized and formalized our product management structure for our whole organization. We've been around for 15 years. We started out in 2000. And a lot of what we did was manage content for mobile carriers. We've worked from all the different companies from Bell, TELUS, Rogers. Nowadays, we actually work in software and app monetization for many different organizations, car companies, all different types of smart devices, tablets, smart boards. And just next month, we will be launching with one of the world's largest e-commerce companies. This summer, we were acquired by AppDirect. AppDirect is a San Francisco-based cloud app commerce platform. And pretty much a week after, they announced that they raised another round at $110 million, which values them at more than $1 billion. So it's been a very, very exciting time for our company since we started as a little office in the Innovate Calgary building. We're one of YYCJS's newest sponsors, and we're very happy to be that. JavaScript is something that almost all of our projects touch. And so I'm here today with a simple message. We're looking for JS developers to join us in changing the way people work, changing how people receive and consume applications, whether it be on the web, mobile, or almost any device you can think of. If you love Node, if you're looking for a new challenge and want to change the way people work, please visit the website. Come talk to me after. I have another colleague here named Jen. Contact any of us. We're happy to talk about App Carousel and what we're doing. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks. So I've got a couple quick questions. Do you know how many people you guys are looking for?
We are looking for at least 2 immediately. And Jen probably is looking for a few more. I think we're about 80 people now. We're hoping to grow about 50% in the next year or so.
Okay.
So we're hiring all manners of developers, really. If some of you in here are not purely JS developers, we're looking for Android, iOS, Java, almost everything under the sun at this point.
PHP, Drupal.
Yeah.
We need a tech lead as well immediately.
Okay. So if you guys didn't hear that, so they need everybody. They need people who've got background with PHP, Drupal. They need a tech lead. They need, you guys were saying iOS, like mobile developers as well.
Yeah, mobile developers.
So kind of all across the board. So if you got skills in that area, you should come talk to these guys. Okay, thank you. So we're gonna move along. I guess if you guys remember from before the summer break, Dave moved out to Van, and I asked if you guys wanted to keep the group going, and got a pretty resounding yes, and I think even by the turnout today, I know that a bunch of people had to drop off, which is kind of usual. But you know, we decided to keep it going, and so this summer I've been working really hard on getting new sponsors, getting stuff a little bit more official, getting stuff more organized. There's potential that we may, if we keep the attendance rates up, we may actually be moving to a different venue. So I'm actually talking with a local bar here in town that I won't announce yet, but working with them that they're potentially willing to sponsor not only a space, but also kind of hook us up with food and drinks, at least discounts down there. One of the things I've also proposed to them is working together that a lot of the proceeds that go from our meetups go towards a local charity. So really what I'm trying to do with the group and what I think the group should be about is building community here and getting people involved. And that's really where our sponsors have kind of stepped in. So this talk's going to be about desktop apps, but I'll get to that in a little bit because I want to take the time to introduce some of our new sponsors this year. So Clio is actually based in Vancouver, but they have some remote developers here, and some of their core team is actually from Calgary. So Tice and Terry, they couldn't be here. They're in Vancouver. You guys might have seen, if you saw the newsletter go around, that they're also hiring. They're looking for a Rails dev and a couple, like a UX designer. But really big of them to come in and help support the group. They're basically paying for a lot of what you see here in terms of food and drinks. And they've actually been a big support for us and even helping, you know, get other sponsors on board. So big thanks to them. Pixis Innovation is another company. They're actually across Canada, but they've got office here in Calgary, and they help fund PhD research here in Calgary as well. And what they do is they basically have a platform for allowing you to visualize data, especially geospatial data, on their own 3D Earth, and similar to kind of Google Earth, but with a lot more flexibility and can handle a lot more data sets. So they've also been a big help and will continue to be this year. I mean, it's because of them that we're able to run the group. Again, same deal here with Assembly. They're offering up the space. Because we've grown, we might actually need to move because our capacity here is technically only 45. And we kind of been pushing the limit the last year or so. And then the new guys here at App Carousel, which you already heard from, they're helping us out both financially and then also going to be, I think, throughout the year helping us out with potentially with some speakers or other, even just moral support. So it's really about bringing community together. So another one, you guys saw the newsletter, we've got Good Bits. They're actually out of Vancouver, but it's saved a ton of time. And I hope you guys notice that it makes the newsletters look a little bit snazzier. The meetup email system is just horrendous. So this, like, you guys maybe don't appreciate it, but I appreciate this because this literally has saved me hours every time. So if you're doing newsletters or marketing, it's actually pretty good. And they've got integrations with MailChimp and Slack and Chrome extension. It's pretty awesome to be able to curate content. Lighthouse Labs, we got some announcements that'll come out the next little bit kind of with them. But they've got a dev bootcamp they're doing in January. They're kicking them some cash to help us out. And to kind of drop some hints, they're probably going to help us out with at least one speaker from out of town. And we might potentially be doing some kind of partnerships. I guess the other thing too, if you didn't see it in the newsletter, for their dev bootcamp, if you're have a bit more spare time and are looking to get paid to do some mentoring, they're looking for at least 1 or 2 on-site mentors for their 8-week camp in January. And then Village Brewery, of course, they've been with us for the last 3 years, so big shout out to them for giving us a discount on some of the beer. And then we've got our community pals, we like to call them, so like the Chic Geek, Ruby, or YYC Ruby, Pixels and Pines, Startup Calgary, Ladies Learning Code, the Python group as well. You know, we're trying to work with them and going to be starting kind of talking with Simon, really trying to bring a lot of the groups together here in Calgary so that we're all kind of feeding off each other, can share information and share knowledge and share speakers and all that sort of stuff. Because it's a lot of work to run these groups, especially by yourself. So this year, that was kind of my rule, is that I'm not going to do it alone and I'm going to try and include people. So with that said, I know a few people who have reached out to talk and to help out and come talk to me again after, because some of you, we were talking via email and it kind of dropped off, and that was partly my fault. But I'm looking for speakers for the next little bit and trying to coordinate with local people, because now that we have better funding this year, we're going to be bringing in speakers from outside of Calgary. So I'm trying to line up with the people outside of Calgary what's available for them. All right. So desktop apps. So who's done any desktop app development in general, old school or kind of new school web stuff? All right, so pretty decent amount actually, probably about a third. I haven't touched desktop stuff since university probably. So I've primarily been web. So it's been pretty interesting kind of coming back to that. So I guess a little bit of history for some of you that haven't touched desktop stuff. You know, kind of the previous state, you had Qt, you had Python, you had Java. I mean, you could do stuff in C++, and you can do stuff in C#, but I'm kind of primarily talking about cross-platform stuff. And I'm sure there's other stuff out there that I haven't heard of, because again, I hadn't really touched a lot of it. But it kind of felt awkward. Like you couldn't doing animations and doing stuff that is really sexy and snazzy in web applications is still pretty hard. Right? Even compared to iOS and some of the frameworks even out there now for Android, like doing animations on and really sexy UI on desktop is actually really tough. So a lot of the time you ended up with apps that kind of look like this, which is not that inspiring, not nice to work on, not very fun. And so I think most of the time you end up just kind of reacting like this a lot of the time. You see a lot of the cross-platform Java apps. I know whenever I had to install one, it was like, no, not again. So then the web kind of came along and really a lot of this stuff started to happen. I mean, you had Flash, which designy people really got excited about because you could do sexy animations, and then HTML5 and JavaScript and CSS. But really the web advanced quite a bit and desktop hadn't really moved that much. And I'm not necessarily picking on desktop. Like there's a lot of really sweet stuff you could do with C#, especially I think. But doing stuff cross-platform still isn't really that great, or at least wasn't until about a year ago, in my opinion. So with those technologies in web, you could do pretty interesting stuff. Like, you know, with Flash, you could animate stickmen fighting each other. You could do stuff like Google Maps, which now has really seamless transitions from zooming in and panning around. And it's really, really quite quick so that it feels like it has a performance as if it was a desktop application, really. And then even further now with games, you've got stuff that's running, you know, 3D rendered stuff with WebGL in the browser that looks like a native game. So things have gone really far, but a lot of the technology hasn't really translated, or a bunch of that web tech that makes it so easy to build applications and build things really quick and build sexy animations hasn't really come back to desktop land. And I think there's been a lot of a push towards mobile especially. So, you know, everybody was putting a lot of their focus on web, and then the mobile application or mobile platforms came along like Android and iOS. And then, you know, first you started getting PhoneGap, for example, and Titanium, where you could actually use web tech to build native apps, you know, various versions of what you call native, right? But native apps all in your phone. And we've seen a trend now where the number of mobile users has surpassed desktop users, right? So it kind of begs the question, you know, does it matter? Is desktop even worth it anymore. And in my opinion, yes, I think that actually there's been a bit of a kind of a resurgence of some of the desktop applications, especially with web tech. I'm going to take this off. Because a lot of the tech now that has made it so easy to build applications on the web now is available for building cross-platform desktop applications. And there's certain times when a desktop application actually makes sense versus a web browser. I don't know if you guys are like me, maybe this is just me, but for example, applications that I have open for a long period of time, like SoundCloud, for example, or you know, I guess even for example, Trello. For me, I use Trello in my workflow a lot. So having a lot of that stuff that's longer running in a browser tab just doesn't feel quite right. I wish that I had the easy access of just, you know, command tabbing over to that application, hiding it when I want to, opening it up when I want to, not necessarily having to always keep my browser window open. Especially because Chrome, while a lot of the browsers are actually pretty expensive, the more tabs and windows that you open up, right? So leaving a lot of that stuff longer standing impacts your experience when you're working and using your computer as well. So like I said, I don't think that the desktop is dead, but there are certain things that actually make sense. So there are some apps that require more than 6 inches of real estate. Like, you're not going to do a lot of the things that you would do on a desktop on your mobile device. So the context really matters, and the modality is different. Some apps are also, like I was saying, used more frequently, so they don't warrant having their own browser tab. They'd probably be better off as a standalone application. And the other thing too, so one of the applications that I've been working on is a database client where I'm using some of this web tech we're going to talk about. And the reason being I'm using some of that tech is there are some pretty good online database clients, for example, where you can query your data. But giving third parties, you know, basically your credentials to all your databases is kind of a risky thing, especially with a lot of the security holes that a lot of people have. I mean, I don't know, you know, a lot of you guys are developers and you know some of the shortcuts that happen. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of places where security, even though people tell you it's top of mind, is not quite top of mind because they have deadlines, they have stuff to get shipped out. And giving people that sort of information, I think, can be pretty detrimental and expensive for your company or your personal stuff if it falls into the wrong hands. So some stuff is probably better and more secure just being in a native application on your physical device. So who here's heard of Atom? Most of you guys. So I think this is another example of something that you use every day, and I would argue sort of where there are some really good alternatives to online text editors, Cloud9 IDE being one of them, but they just haven't quite picked up the same level of steam that a desktop GUI picks up. For developers, you're using it pretty much every day. It's something that you kind of just want on your desktop. Not, you know, and Cloud9 has addressed, you know, offline mode, and they've addressed a bunch of that stuff. They built a really excellent product, but I think this is the thing, is that a lot of people want that native experience. So Atom is a text editor built by GitHub that's open source. It's hackable, which means you can write your own plugins and stuff for it. It's not really that different from Sublime Text if you've seen it in terms of how it operates and a lot of the controls and even the plugins and stuff like that. But what is different about it is that Sublime Text is written in Python, and that one is cross-platform. And Atom is cross-platform, but is written using their underlying technology called Electron. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is in a bit, but there are some big people that also think that these things should be, that are kind of pushing this movement forward, and that some things like this, like a text editor, things you're using every day, still belong on the desktop. So your kind of options when you're writing native apps using web tech, I already mentioned Electron, but one of the other ones here is used to be called Node Webkit. It's now called NW.js. They're kind of similar. And then the third one is MacGap, and then the fourth is actually Windows, because Microsoft has made it so that you can write, I think it's been a while since I wrote one actually, but I think you can write at least basic applications for Windows 8 and up in HTML, CSS, and JS, and TypeScript as well if you're going that route. So the difference, though, between the two on the left and the two on the right is the two on the left are cross-platform and the two on the right are not. So with MacGap, it's Mac only, even though you're using WebTech, and for Microsoft, it's Windows only. So I'm only going to talk about the other two on the left because those are the two that I kind of have experience with as well. I lied, I'm going to talk about MacGap. For your mobile development, it's the same concept, but for desktop or basically Mac applications. It's a web view wrapper. You can put stuff in the App Store, which is kind of sweet, but it's not as performant. You don't have the same level of access to native libraries, to native constructs on your Mac device. And like I said, it's not cross-platform. So Electron, this one is sponsored by GitHub. The way, I guess some of the differences, so I've included a link in the bottom. This guy did a pretty good comparison between Node Webkit and Electron, because these are kind of the two forerunning technologies for cross-platform desktop apps. I'd say, like I said up here, the biggest difference is the fact that they're using libchromium content, and what you need to know about that is essentially they're using a thinner version of Chrome. So Node Webkit is using a version of Chrome, essentially, or Chromium, which includes all of the stuff that comes with it, whereas these guys are basically just using the lower level stuff that they need to in order to make your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript run, but without some of the extra overhead. So it makes it a lighter app, a little bit faster, and it makes it easier for them to stay up to date with current web technology. Downside with Electron is, so far, I'm not aware of any app that's actually made it into the App Store. One guy apparently built one, but it was pretty crazy how he went around it. He did a whole bunch of insane direct compiling that you just wouldn't want to do. I think that's actually not an issue, but we can talk a little bit about that after if you guys have questions. The other thing too is, in my opinion, Electron compared to Node Webkit especially, it's got better native cross-platform support. It's got better auto-updating support, better video codec support. Like it supports the H.264 and MP4 codecs, and like I said, faster updates for web technology. So the big advantage of having these two platforms, especially when you're used to developing for web, is that you get to use kind of the new shiny hot stuff that's come along with Chrome, because a lot of this stuff is kind of bleeding edge. So for example, you can use Flexbox without having to worry about cross-platform or cross-browser compatibility issues, right? You can just build a desktop app that runs across all platforms, but is using the latest version of one of the latest versions of Chrome, right, essentially. And you get all the sweet stuff that comes along with it, including like WebGL, CSS shaders, like just all the crazy stuff that you never really get to actually use in production ever, because it just doesn't work like that. So where Node WebKit kind of shines, in my opinion, I'm a bit biased, but I think that Electron is better overall, primarily because of the architecture decision they made for using libchromium. But with Node WebKit, because you're essentially using Chrome, you can get it into the App Store, into both the Windows and Mac app stores, by without having to do a bunch of crazy compilation. I guess another plus, if you have to support some pretty legacy stuff, is Windows XP support. I mean, I think that's kind of a negligible advantage, really, since Microsoft isn't even supporting XP. But hey, I thought I'd mention it. Another big one too is that they actually have commercial support, so they're supported by Intel as well, which, in my opinion, now, like most open source projects, if they're supported by a pretty big company that is long-standing, you have some stability there. I mean, it's not guaranteed, but you definitely have more than if it's just a couple guys in their basement. So I want to talk a little bit more about Electron and the stuff that you can kind of do with it. You can do really similar things with Node WebKit and Electron, but the other thing for me is just the level of fit and finish and the polish on the applications that have been produced by Electron has been a pretty big differentiator in the market. So things like Speak, which is a web, like a live chat or live video conferencing application. You've got Slack. You've got oh man, they got acquired by Docker. I'll come back to it. One sec. We're gonna find it. Kitematic is what it's called. So basically, all these applications in here are all built with Electron. You've got Atom, which is editor. You've got database clients. You've got stuff for making GIFs. You got stuff for monitoring system processes. You got stuff for like this really great app for having ambient noise, so that you don't get distracted by your coworkers. So there's a bunch of really great stuff that's built with Electron. And let's see. Oop. So let's take a look at some of the apps that kind of have been built. I mean, you guys have probably heard of Slack before, but for example, Speak. This is a pretty new application that came out, and I actually use it. I'm going to just pull it up so you can kind of see. Because some of the really cool stuff they're doing, frankly, I haven't even figured out how they're doing. I'm trying to talk with them. I actually have a call with them tomorrow to figure out how they're doing some stuff. But they have this, so they have kind of a floating or sitting dock on the side. A design choice that I think is actually really quite handy, but is pretty hard, can be kind of hard to do in using native code, like using native libraries. There's a lot of custom stuff you'd have to do to get that to work, especially to try and do it cross-platform, right? So these guys, to be fair, are Mac only, and they've got Windows, I think, in beta, and they've got Linux coming out based on demand, which I think is probably going to be pretty soon. But that's the sort of stuff that you can do, and it looks and feels just like a native app. So you know, I can go and add a team. They've got Slack integration. It really doesn't feel any different. And same with if you guys have pulled up Slack, right? It doesn't really, you know, it's not sluggish. It doesn't feel web at all. That one's a pretty simple one. I would have liked to show you guys the video, but no one's online for me to call. but here's another one. So Pixate, they got acquired by Google, and this one is actually one that's really quite impressive. You know, Slack looks really good. It's really polished. It's a chat application though. Speak, you know, they were using WebRTC for video conferencing, but that's a lot more intensive than just a chat application. With Pixate, you've got stuff, and actually another one is Avocode, where you can actually design, this allows you to design web or design mobile applications and actually generate the code for you, right? That one's not necessarily a new concept, but I think the interesting thing with Pixate is you can actually apply animations. So if any of you guys have seen Framer.js before, Pixate is kind of an alternative to that. And it allows you to kind of do mock-ups in web and animate it. And again, doing all that stuff in what looks like a desktop application, I think is pretty important, because for designers, this might be something you're using for a good portion of your day. It's something you need the screen real estate for. It's something where you might need file system access, because that's all a bunch of the extra stuff that you can get with Electron. So that's kind of what I wanted to basically give you a quick overview of what that stuff is. I guess first off, maybe any questions before I kind of show some of the stuff, some of the other tools that are out there, and maybe some of the things that you can do with Electron?
Is there any sort of system looking into for downloading updates, like Chromosome update process?
Yeah, that's actually a pretty big advantage of Electron. So I don't know, who here's heard of Popcorn Time? Probably all of you, or anybody who's willing to admit it. So Popcorn Time was actually written, I would say that's the most popular. Yeah, no, for sure. It's actually, maybe Slack rivals it, but it's the most popular web-based cross-platform application, and they're using Node Webkit. So the interesting thing is, let me see if we can do it. I've downloaded it for trial purposes, for development purposes, but from what I remember, we can, so you can actually go in, and now Node Webkit and Electron allow you to do obfuscation of your code, or compression, I guess. So they've got two different formats. The one with Node Webkit is pretty new. With Atom, it's called NSR file format. Really, there are ways to kind of decompile it, but it makes it a lot harder. What some people have done, let's see if these guys have actually done it. Sorry, these resources. So you can see they got an app, a Node Webkit app. They got their icon. And then we can go, they've got node modules, right? So they have a lot of node modules, package.json, readme. So what we do is I'm gonna hook my mic back up. Just so you guys get an idea of what some of the stuff kind of looks like. And I'll even give you a little sneak peek of kind of what I've been working on as well, or at least what some of the source looks like. So again, not a whole lot different than your regular web application. You know, they've got a lib file, they've got basically a whole bunch of stuff, but it's not actually that crazy. Some of the code is pretty gnarly of this guy, but you can see, if you want to see kind of what a big ass Node Webkit app looks like, the beauty of a bunch of these apps is people haven't taken the time to go and obfuscate their stuff. I mean, I wouldn't say there's not a huge incentive for Popcorn Time to do it in the first place. But you can see a bunch of the code that they've got there and see how a lot of it is constructed, which is pretty nice. So the thing with how, like I had mentioned in the slide deck, one of the main differences for how Node WebKit apps and Electron apps get booted up is traditionally Node WebKit has a index.html file, and that's kind of your launching point, and you'll have a bunch of scripts in there that you're referencing. And I think there's like a, yeah, so they've, if that's not the boot, yeah, so there's their bootstrap start script. So it's kind of like a little bit more the old school way of loading stuff into your browser or your HTML file, right? Now, I guess with some of the newer versions, they actually support loading it from a JavaScript file, and that's how GitHub's Electron works. Is that you basically feed it? You've got an HTML file, but you feed it a JavaScript app or a JavaScript script, and then that's your starting point for the rest of your application. So a slight difference in how stuff is booted up. But what I was going to kind of get back to your question, I was going to see if I can find it. If you remember if you guys have ever used Popcorn Time, they have an auto updating feature up in the corner that you can accept. And basically, it might be kind of hard for me to find it, but essentially how theirs works, that's kind of one of the areas that's a little bit tricky still right now. And this is where Electron actually has done a really good job. With Popcorn Time, what they do is they make a fetch to the server to say, hey, do I need an update? Yes, I do. Okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull down the code, and I'm going to basically shut myself down. No, what do they do in the order that they do it? Because what they essentially end up doing is they end up basically pulling down the code, storing it in a temporary location, shutting down the application, booting up the old one, and deleting the old application. So it's kind of a weird process, a weird flow. But the way that, I mean, it works, but it's kind of weird. The way that GitHub has their stuff, they actually have a little bit better cross-platform support. And I'm going to find the GitHub repo. So they've got an actual auto-updating module. And the big difference is that they actually hook into more of the native way that the operating system handles auto-updates. The big one that we were kind of waiting on was Windows support. And I think there is a way to do it. It's not in this documentation. It's kind of buried in a GitHub issue. But on Mac, they have what's called the Squirrel framework, which basically is a mechanism for making that request to say, what do you need? Or am I up to date? If not, what should I be getting? And then you're pulling down code and updating yourself. Another way to actually handle that, so that's when you're actually downloading an update. So if you've seen any of the native OS X applications, they behave the same way. A lot of them use the same framework, actually. So they'll say, you'll get a notice that pops up that says an update's available. Yes, I want to do it. And then you pop into kind of the native flow for updating the application. And then basically it will reinstall a new version over top of the old one, right? Another way to handle that, and what I think is actually a smarter way, and what I had started looking at doing with the database client I was working on, that I am working on, is actually making a request to the server and just pulling down the JavaScript that I need and any other CSS and stuff like that. But you can actually just make a request to fetch those details as opposed to downloading a whole new application, right? So the interesting thing that I ran into is that works great for most applications, but if you're actually compiling native libraries like I am, I'm compiling native database drivers, I can't do that in some instances, right? Because I actually need to recompile the C code for it to work. So I actually have a hybrid of both. So if it's just a JS update or just some styling or whatever, I make a fetch and I'll just pull that stuff down, and it's basically just a live reload. Like you wouldn't even see an update happen, and that's kind of how Slack does a lot of their updates. You might notice something changed, but you didn't have to explicitly say, I'm going to update. Whereas when you have to compile native libraries, you kind of have to go a bit more of either the native route with Electron or kind of the Node WebKit way, where you pull down a new version of a new built version, and then you basically reinstall it over top of the old. Long-winded answer, but it's actually pretty complex. And it took me quite a while to figure out how some of these things were working and how guys were doing it, and what might be the best way for handling it, especially in my case when I have native and maybe non-native updates, right? Any other questions? I haven't done a lot of benchmarking. I don't know if this guy actually did. I don't think he actually did benchmarking. I'm not even that familiar with the browser mark score. They're pretty close. I mean, they're not that far off. They're essentially all still using native. Like I said, the biggest difference is that you've got basically a full version of Chromium, which is a little bit heavier, or you're getting the stripped out kind of version. I read in depth the difference a while back, and I actually honestly forget what pieces GitHub stripped out. But the big thing for me was that they're able to iterate and update it much quicker because they don't have to, because of the way they're using it, as opposed to Node WebKit is kind of shoehorned into Chromium, whereas they basically are using libchromium as an underlying library for their platform on top. So it makes it easier for them to switch that out. But in terms of staying up to date, they both support, I mean, IO.js is now kind of even dead. They both support, well, not dead, but they've merged back with Node. But they both support, at least Electron supports the latest version of Node. I think Node WebKit does as well. And you can kind of see, so I think this guy's kept it pretty up to date, actually. So Electron's at Chrome version 44, and the other one's in 41 with soon to be 44. So they're pretty on par. Anybody else? Okay. So I'm not going to actually dive into too much. I'm giving a talk at JS Open next week where I'm actually going to show a bit more of code. I'm going to talk, some of it will be kind of similar. I'll be, giving a quick overview, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about code next week. I think there's still tickets available too, and it's free. So if you guys want to come, you should register. But what I did want to kind of show is some of the stuff that you can do again with Electron. Let's see. So Mono is pretty interesting. Actually, what we can also do is we can grab one of these, because I think this one you can actually download for free. So typically, the way they get distributed is you basically just have a pre-built file and people wrap it up in a zip. They're pretty big. They range anywhere from, this one's 115 megs. So that's really because you're building in Chrome, right? If you're to do a Mac gap application, I've seen those down as low as like 5 megs. So that's also one thing to consider if you're not too concerned about cross-platform or necessarily performance. What some of the other guys have done, Speak, for example, what they've done is they've actually wrapped it up in a proper like DMG installer. If you guys are familiar with that, with a regular Mac download, you have a DMG where you drag it, where it pops up a window that says, hey, drag this to your applications folder. They've done that. So there's kind of two different ways. I prefer actually their way. It's a little bit more overhead, but it makes it feel more native. Which to a regular user, I think is pretty nice. So this is, some of the stuff. So you can talk to audio. Looks like they're using some Material UI components, but I mean, that's kind of the beauty. There's been so much stuff built for web that you now don't need to recreate in order to build really gorgeous looking applications for your desktop and that work across multiple platforms. So I can affect the volume, stuff like that, right? Nothing too crazy, but it's stuff that you just don't have access to before. So a lot of the things that you do get access to, for example, like file system access, access to the menu bar, or like your bar down here, including being able to configure what comes up in these options. You can have it positioned up in Mac. You can have it as like a docked, I forget what these are called, but up in your menu bar at the top. And you can actually have, I think you can do them with both Node WebKit and Electron, but with Electron you can have your app as either kind of like a toolbar only app. You can have it as kind of a menu bar only app or a hybrid of both, which is kind of nice. So it really gives you that whole native feel. It's not just a kind of just a browser window and that's it. So I think that's all that I actually wanted to talk about today. I kind of just wanted to give you guys a brief intro and then open it up to questions after if you guys want to come and ask me about kind of how stuff works. Because there's a lot to building it. And I think the biggest difference for me, I guess one thing that's kind of been a paradigm shift from going from web to building a native app is that, or native, is that I've seen kind of two schools where people try and shoehorn their usual web flow, like an MVC framework and a server wrapped up into an application. Or I've taken the approach where it's actually just the client with maybe an abstraction layer, because in my instance, I'm still talking to a remote server, right? So it'd be kind of weird to have in the client have kind of your web client that then talks to a server, which then talks to another server, which then maybe talks to other servers. So trying to kind of go back to it just being a client and that's it. All right, that's it. So feel free to stick around. Next month is a little bit TBD. I'll let you guys know if we're going to be switching venues, and I'll kind of let you know what the talk is about hopefully next couple weeks. A couple guys were proposing a talk on kind of Chrome Inspector and some of the really cool stuff you can do with Chrome Inspector and debugging. Another one was basically managing your web development or Node.js development and deployment and scaling with Docker. Which I think will actually be pretty interesting. I've been playing around with Docker quite a bit the last little while as well. So if you guys have votes for that, let me know and I'll harp on the guys who were looking to talk about it. Okay, thanks.